Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. Now, we've got 4 really special guests and myself to talk you through some of the really interesting things we're seeing out there in terms of actual use cases in legal today. This session is recorded, so for those of you who join us later, just speed to the parts that are most interesting to you. Now, I'm going to be introducing the guests in a second, but just to set the stage, I'll give you a little bit of background on how we came to decide on today's topic and what we'll be covering. So we had a webinar around about a month ago, and at the end of that webinar, someone asked, well, that was great, but what are actual use cases? And specifically, what are actual use cases inside of law firms? Now, of course, lots and lots of law firms have use cases, but not a lot of people necessarily go through and share them. There was an experience I heard where an Australian chief knowledge officer went to a conference, and essentially she spent the whole time sharing her use cases while a lot of people weren't really sharing theirs. And so it leads to this perception of, well, do you have use cases, or is it all just talk? And inside this fog of war, we want to bring on these guests today to dispel that a little bit, blow away the fog, because there are real use cases, but those use cases may not be what you call end-to-end applications. There are lots of little points where Gen AI has a huge benefit and uplift to law firms, and that's one of those things that we want to dispel, among many other things. So before I go on, I'm going to add everybody on the stage and I'll let everybody introduce themselves. So we've got Elizabeth Wilkinson, Elliot White, Conan Hines, and Christian Lang. Elizabeth, do you want to give a quick intro of yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I'm excited to be here. I am Director of Knowledge Solutions at Paul Weiss.
Thank you. Elliot, over to you.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Great to be here, everyone. Director of Innovation and Legal Technology at Adelshaw Goddard, who are a law firm in the UK and Europe. Been here for 3 years and used to work vendor side, so a bit of knowledge from both sides of this.
Amazing. Christian, you're next on my window, so we're changing orders already. Why don't you give a quick intro of yourself?
Sure thing. Christian Lang, I'm the founder and CEO of Lega, which is a governance and adoption platform for LLMs that works mostly with large global law firms.
Thank you. And Conan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Horace, and good to see everybody. Conan Hines, Director of Legal Tech and AI at Fried Frank.
Amazing. So let's get started. By the way, anyone with questions, please put them in the chat. We are monitoring those, and for any questions that we get live, we are going to throw those up as much as we can to answer them for you. So before this session, we kind of came up with 3 categories of questions. And the first category is, well, what are the use cases? What are those use cases broadly? Which use cases for Gen AI have been successful? And Elizabeth, can you start us off? Like, what have you found at Paul Weiss to be the use cases that have been successful, that you have seen?
Sure, absolutely. So there are many use cases that we've found generative AI applications to be helpful for. 3 in particular sort of came to mind as we were preparing for this. The first is summarization, so essentially decreasing the time to insight. The second is extraction, so surfacing key data points or information. And the third is drafting, especially when taking on a particular style, either by identifying the audience or the level of formality, or providing guidance on what to use as a reference, so pulling in an example for drafting. And you know, when we talk about things like summarization and decreasing the time to insight, it's not just for the summary itself, but really in creating a framework for the review, the sort of human in the loop review, or kind of using it as a gating tool so that you can more easily digest the information in long documents, new documents. So think about sort of a new regulation that comes on, or a particularly long case or set of cases.
That's it's a really great introduction, I guess. And like, I think what I've heard out there as well is most of these still kind of rely on the chatbot interface to present that information. And I want to throw to Elliot and Conan. Maybe Elliot, starting with you. What have you seen in terms of use cases at Adelshaw?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to go to specifics in terms of like some really specific document areas we can look at, which I think fall within those use case themes that Elizabeth was kind of speaking to. That's kind of what we call them internally as use case themes, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I'm really glad that we all seem to have the same things there. That's a really great way to start with this. So one of the things we kind of use it from the drafting perspective would be witness statements. So some of our lawyers, essentially do interviews. They take a full transcript of that witness statement, and essentially they will then be using for us AGPT, which is our own platform, to essentially take that full witness statement and synthesize it into essentially a drafted witness statement, or to just pull out kind of specific themes that they can use for that work. So that was to one extent, that was a quick and easy kind of use case that our lawyers kind of jumped onto very quickly. And then I guess another one in the review theme would be on the asset finance equipment leases. So that's essentially if you're looking at borrowing money to lease and rent machinery for some of our clients. So we look at that as like repeatable review work. So you'd be kind of looking for it to kind of give you specific information from those documents, and then again kind of taking that as a summary, whether that's into a table or just under specific headings of essentially what you're looking for. But that's going to be like the parties, the termination rights, essentially other points that you would pre-prompt, I suppose. That's all we can kind of build all of that out as part of our prompts library in terms of what we do going forwards. It's going to bring that information out for you. We use that for AGPT. There's a bulk piece for that where we use a different tool. So we use CoCounsel to do that at a much larger level, from hundreds of documents to bulk extraction into like a matrix essentially. So again, same idea, but essentially how do I pull that information out into specific areas? And I think the beauty of this is that it turns into each document has a very similar feel of what you're trying to pull out of it. So I can talk more to that later, but there's some of the kind of really specific things we're doing. But once you've done it for one, there's lots of other practice areas within the firm that would need to do the same things and the kind of sort of information they're looking to pull out essentially.
Conan, what about you? What have you seen in your practice?
Yeah, so I think some of the ancillary aspects around the practice of law we're exploring quite vigorously. So mostly in the marketing and the KM spaces, rewriting attorney bios is a great use case. Deal closing summaries. Just think about, really manual effort, a lot of editing needed. We can automate a good amount of that. Also just like newsletters, you do research, being able to write this stuff better. So you're not really asking the Gen AI to do the analysis, but once you've done the analysis, it just makes it a lot more consumable, for your readers. And the way we like to think about it is that, if you think about it high level, is it's either a front end or a back end kind of tool for us. We're not looking for it to do sort of the middle work, we'll call it. So it gets you started, or it finishes it up for you, and it kind of scrutinizes on the back end, or it gives you creative ideas on the front end. And I think there's plenty of work to be done there before we get into cannibalizing too much of what our lawyers do today. And maybe I'll be able to show something we're working on later in the cast. Horace, you're on mute.
This happens to me all the time. I was just saying, quite
I don't think Gen
unintentionally.
AI can do that yet, can unmute you when it sees your lips reading, but I feel like it should be able to.
It doesn't Omni do that now? Like when you speak, it just pauses and then it picks it up. Yeah, Elliot's nodding.
It does. I've used it. It's weird. It's weirdly good.
Ah, okay. Well, I have not the privilege to use that just yet, but quite unintentionally, I think we ended up with Elliot. You're talking about a lot of practice of law use cases, and Conan, you alluded to quite a few business of law use cases, both of which I think are valid. And there's a sort of conflation between the two sometimes, but I think they are very distinct. Christian, as the CEO of Lega, you would have seen a lot of these different use cases rolled out at different firms. What's kind of been your experience? What have you seen out in the market?
It's really a phenomenal cross section. I mean, these are such utterly transformative technologies. Oh, I get a close up. Get my. These are such transformational technologies. We have an immense amount to learn, I think, about how we can best use them, how we can best leverage them, where to point them, et cetera. And so what we see in our kind of cohort the firms that we collaborate with and try to help on their journey to safely explore this stuff, they're really pulling on lots of different threads, which I think is important at this point in time. In our domain, we have seen a lot of uptake of things that we're picking up where Conan left off, like kind of ancillary processes, things that are kind of issues, but you can really streamline them. For example, I think the most highly adopted app in our ecosystem is about polishing emails, largely from like non-US offices or lawyers, English not first language. Like the quality of those emails is being significantly enhanced at the moment as a result of these things. Everyone's doing a policy chatbot to make it, that information that's typically on your intranet, make it more accessible. And people are experimenting with the BD use cases, making sure you can, when these firms invest huge amounts of money pushing out these memos of thought leadership, that you can then take that and spin it up into a bunch of different channels and make it very accessible very quickly. And I'd say that most of the firms that we interact with, both our current customers and firms in our sales pipeline, they usually have a pretty huge, and we may touch on this, Horace, about how you think about collecting use cases. They have a pretty long list of things that they think they want to do. But we really need an easy ability to kind of sort wheat from chaff, because sometimes it's going to work really well and sometimes it's not, or sometimes it works okay, but there's the legacy tool set that is much, much better for that. And we're starting in our ecosystem to start to see that separation between the wheat and the chaff. I mean, I think across all of our firms, we probably have, firms configured somewhere between 50 and 70 different kind of point solutions, doing different things, attacking different things. And there's really interesting consistency and themes across that, but there are also some amazing kind of outlier use cases. And so this is a lot. Let's talk about use cases. We're not going to talk a lot about Lega today, but one point I will make that I think is really important. We don't know. Everyone who's going to come to this challenge to try to explore these models is going to bring their own domain expertise and their own set of experiences. And that knowledge and experience is going to unlock an opportunity that other people may not see. So I think a lot of our emphasis at this point in time is not about how can we zero in on these atomic, like 5 use cases, 10 use cases. It's how do we get a lot of people involved, create the safety for them to actually help find these really cool, valuable use cases, see them, support them, and take everyone on a responsible journey. And that's what we're kind of passionate about.
So really nice segue. This was supposed to be the last topic, but I'm going to bring it way forward, which is how do we discover the use cases in the first place? And I think it's one of those challenges that a lot of firms have. I heard this story, and I have not followed up on this, where Gilbert and Tobin in Sydney or in Australia ran an experiment where they invited all of their lawyers to go and find use cases and submit their proposals. And I think like the best use case won $10,000 or something like that. So from that, I believe they got something like 1,200 use cases, but that's the rumor mill, which is an insane number of use cases to go through. So maybe I'll throw to Elizabeth, like, how did you come up with and test different use cases?
Well, I mean, I think it would be fun to put all of those use cases into a Gen AI application and see what the themes are among them and see how much those mirror what we've been talking about. But that wasn't the question you asked me. So the use cases that we come up with, honestly, they come from a number of sources. So initially, our knowledge and innovation team and our KM attorneys tested a lot of use cases, even before we really started a larger push on some of our tools with the attorneys. And it was often driven by what we know the lawyers were working on, or requests that we get for precedent and so on, other resources, what we hear practice group meetings. And then, once we've had some early adopters, people sort of knocking on our door, and these Gen AI enthusiasts, they'll reach out to ask, hey, could it be used for this? Or can I try Gen AI with XYZ? Or, even on top of that, when we've done trainings or presentations, we often just, even in the course of talking to people about certain applications, use cases come up as we're showing other things. And I think this was, somebody already mentioned this, but if you, and maybe it was you, Christian, I think, as we get people kind of in this space of exploration, it just drives use case after use case after use case, and it becomes more of an organic process, which is really fun to see in practice.
Horace, can I tack onto that real quick?
Please.
Because everyone here has a pretty deep technology background, but I suspect there's a lot of people listening that don't necessarily. So really important here to surface a pearl of product-related wisdom that has nothing to do with generative AI. And this is particularly true in legal, because lawyers love to complain. We love to say what we like, or we definitely need this, or this is such a huge pain point, et cetera, et cetera. and that's valuable. I'm not saying don't do that. Have the conversation, surface the ideas, absolutely. But if you want to really find something that's going to move the needle, you have to watch user behavior. You have to watch what they do. When somebody says, I hate this, this is ruining my life, ask them, okay, what have you done in the past to try to fix it? And if they haven't lifted their finger to build that Excel macro or do what, haven't done anything to try to baling wire and scotch tape a solution, it's really not that bad of a pain point. So what we need to do in addition to having the conversations is find a way to see and have observability over what people are doing, because that's the true user behavior is the true signal as to where we're going to find really powerful penetration points. And that's something I learned in the product context outside of large language models, but it's particularly relevant here if we're going to get a lot of new people involved in essentially building products.
Okay, so then what are the tools that we can use to monitor these different things? Because right now, one of the hard things at law firms is we're not really capturing much data. So how do you go about monitoring what users are doing? Do you just do old-fashioned surveys, or is there a better method? Maybe Elliot, I'll throw it to you, because I know you found lots and lots of use cases in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think some of the use cases are just from work. We really, to a certain extent, we come at this at quite an unstructured way from our use case perspective, right? It was about getting interested in the tech. So, we had working groups, we applied technologies and put them, some of those ones that we proved concepts, we put them in our lawyers' hands. I'm like, great, what did you use it for? And so we created small groups with our legal technologists and senior legal technologists working with them so they could do that. I think that piece that Christian's talking to is just being close to them and what's it good for? What do you not like? And we can learn from both parts of that. I think the benefit we found with doing our own platform piece, and fully aware that not everyone wants to go that route, and that's not necessarily the best route for everyone. But there is some reporting we can do on that, just the types of users, who is going in and using this. We were quite interested and surprised to see there was a higher level, let's say, of like associate involvement, and was up there with some of the trainees in terms of how much they were using the tech. So there's things you can learn from them just in terms of the type of people using the technology. And then kind of beyond that, we do surveys, and we'll talk to, maybe not now, but some of the survey information, a little while on the other questions. But that's really valuable, just asking them questions, surveying them and saying, okay, great. We put really simple questions out to them about how they're using it. We want their feedback. And we've been quite intrigued to see, some of it around time saving, some of it around kind of the value it brings. And again, I can talk to that later, but that's how we've been doing it. It's just engaging them in very simple ways whilst also just talking to them. And, I can talk about the broader engagement maybe a bit later as well in terms of what we did across the firm, in terms of strategies we did. And then I'm going to say strategies is quite that's probably a bit of a grandiose term, but just being a bit structured about how we're going to look at kind of talking to our lawyers about this essentially. But it's those sorts of things that we're learning from. And I think it really just comes down to working closely with them. And we're somewhat fortunate as a firm because, we put the time in early with innovation to make sure we've got the team and the size set up for us to be able to do that. Fully understand that this is much harder to do when you're 3 people in the team, that there's a lot more to kind of ask of them there. But that's what kind of why our focus has been a bit more broad, because we've been able to do that.
So if you're lucky and you have a massive KM&I team, then I think surveys and all those kind of traditional techniques can work really well. But if you have a smaller team, which I think, Conan, you have a smaller team compared to Elliot, how would you go about, how have you gone about discovering these use cases?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's very grassroots at this point. I think getting to a standard sort of ideation platform, I've seen that before at previous firms, and it can work well, but it takes some shepherding into it. So to me, it's almost you find people in the firm who are excited and will give some time to it, because there's a lot of people, and I get it, that there's a lot of lawyers that there's just too much unknown to give up a lot of time for it, but you have to find those that will. And you kind of just sort of tag team where you meet that person and you tell them, give me a name of someone in the firm who will sit down and talk to me for 15, 20, 30 minutes, show on a screen. I love what Christian was saying earlier. Let me see your process today and see if it's actually something that you've really tried to engineer, or you're just trying to take the easy way out now that AI is here. And if it's the latter, it's probably not a good place to start. It's not a good use of your time if you are sort of still building your team out and looking for those meaningful wins, because those wins is sometimes seems somewhat easy, and sometimes if you're set up right, even trivial to make some of these AI applications. There's always more work to be done, and it's going to continue. You excite someone once, they're going to want to continue on that journey. So it's super important to pick those that are in it for the right reasons and have already been trying to do everything they can with the tools available to improve that process that you're looking at.
So I think that's a really nice segue, because it leads into like, how do you pick between all the different possible use cases? Like, you have 10 champions who all come to you and say, I've got the best use case, but you've only got 5 days in the week. Elizabeth, Christian, I haven't gone to you about finding use cases, but I will come back to you about finding use cases, because I think you're in a special case here where people essentially come to you. But in terms of those who have to handle picking the 1, 2, 3 out of the plethora, what would you do? Elizabeth, what's been your experience?
So, I think as much as we can, we are trying to all of the use cases and see what energy and resources we can put behind them. Not to say that we're sort of spreading ourselves too thin, but I think on the one hand, there is a lot of interest across our practices and our business professionals as well, and we are trying to explore many, if not all of them. I also think, and this sort of circles back, that often they do fall into certain categories where we can take the learning from one to then inform the next, which is really helpful. And then, continuing to monitor usage as well. So this sort of circles back to our last topic, monitoring usage. And this is something we did before Gen AI tools as well, right? I mean, you want to look at how your users are using the resources that exist, what questions are they asking, because it helps you push useful resources, but also understand where the gaps are too. So all of that, I think, comes into play in understanding where you're really getting traction and where you need to sort of push more, where you can use the learning from one place in another.
So an open question to everyone then. We've mentioned monitoring and traction a couple of times. And so let's talk practicalities. Like, how often would you run these surveys? How do you get them out there? How do you make sure that they're responded to? I know this is like a big change management question rather than a Gen AI question, but I think it's related, because what you don't want is you don't want to spend 6 months developing a use case to find 3 users. So open question to the group. How do you go about collecting the information you need?
I would just say, Horace, it's again, Christian alluded to this. It's really, I don't know how different it is, right? Looking for a Gen AI use case than we had pre-ChatGPT. Been looking for it. If you can get into time analysis, if you can, query the group, and you should hopefully know how many users there are before you venture down that path. So it's just pure business analysis, and that's probably another webinar in some respects, but it's probably good to just reinforce it that we don't have to change a whole lot. It's just that the tools have changed, and so we can do a lot more, but we can also get ourselves into stickier situations as well, because we are going to see more excitement around it from your law firm colleagues.
Yeah, can I weigh in on that, Horace?
Please.
Yeah, so I love that. Very important orientation. What is actually different and new? And a lot of this is not reinventing the wheel. Let's focus on what is just different about this. And in my opinion, it's the speed of change. Everything is happening so quickly, and I, absolutely we're in a crazy hype cycle, but I deeply believe that these technologies and leveraging them effectively will be existential for knowledge work on a pretty medium time horizon. It's not going to be 20 years. It's going to be 5, 10 years. And to your point, Horace, we have to be able to move as fast as the market is changing. We have to have that nimbleness. And so I think our goal as enterprises should be, how do we do that? Like, what do we need to do to put in place to do that? And it sparked a couple of very clear thoughts. Every time you want to test something, you can't be in that old legacy paradigm where it's like, okay, we have to pick 3. the lists, whoever mentioned it earlier, you go out and collect 1,000 use cases. You have to find a way to vet a couple hundred use cases in parallel. Find a platform layer. It doesn't have to be Lega. Find a platform layer that can do this for you, where the business stakeholders can configure something and see if it works. Let me tell you a very quick anecdote. We had one of our customers, for example, saw a senior partner repeatedly asking the same series of questions day after day about a particular company. And they just knocked on his door and said, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm going into BD meetings. I'm just trying to get a sense." The stuff that we would send down to the library for when I was in practice, but sometimes there's too much headaches around that, right? So they said, "Hold on." They run back to the office. They configure a new little app in Lega to a company profiler to answer those 8 questions he was asking over again. And now the partner goes and plugs in a name and gets the answers. And it's not revolutionary, but it doesn't need to compete with your product implementation roadmap. It's a small little thing, but it adds 10 minutes to that partner's day, and that's a valuable 10 minutes. And the other thing I want to say before I stop talking, I noticed a comment come across from Tom Baldwin, which I 100% agree with, about focusing on current pain points. One of the most valuable things you can do, like, because we used to talk about this all the time in my reign in court days before we were even talking about LLMs. Watch things like your firm-wide emails and group-wide emails that go out. And what you will see is somebody saying, "Hey, who speaks Portuguese and can give me 10 minutes?" Because there was something in an email thread they need to try to decipher really quick. And just the process of deleting that email on 1,500 machines cost your firm tens of thousands of dollars. It's extraordinary. And that's the sort of thing where, our LLM translation is going to replace the really high fidelity translation infrastructure we have in place for real meaningful translation use cases today? Absolutely not. But is that quick and dirty, giving somebody the ability to get a quick and dirty translation of something that came across and like reading down an email thread to see whether they need to surface it to the right people? It's incredibly valuable. And people are expressing that pain all day, every day in our organizations. Like, pay attention to it, harvest it. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Go straight at it, because that's the stuff that really matters and moves the needle immediately.
So there's a difference between small use cases and big use cases, and we'll talk specifics in a little bit. But we do have a really, really interesting question from Ryan. So before we move on about tracking successes, let's talk about tracking failures. What's your strategy for tracking what hasn't worked, and what's your process for revisiting them? Because language models are improving so quickly. Maybe you can answer it now. Anyone got an answer to that?
I feel like Ryan's been reading my notes. I had something here that said revisit old problems that were hard to solve before. And I think that goes into the use case piece. So it wasn't just let's identify loads of new use cases. There's a lot of knowledge just inherent within our team members of, I tried to build this in whatever technologies we had in the past and we couldn't quite make it work. That's not unusual. So one of the first things our team has done, and I think is where we've been able to bring value outside of just knowing about the tech, is, we worked on that thing with that person before. I think we could revisit that. And is there a different way of doing it? And we're sort of looking at that for some of the old DD stuff we used to do. There were problems we were trying to solve there. It wasn't really possible. Everyone's always trying to solve this, is the point. I don't think DD is new in that sense, but there's things that we're already seeing now, and that's how you approach this with new tech. Is you look at an old problem and you say, okay, well, maybe I could do some of this now. So there's not necessarily a process around that, I don't think. I mean, that's just kind of what we're expected to do as an innovation team, is to look at problems, work through them, kind of thrash that out, see if it looks like you could do it. That's the bit of trial and error there. And then if it's good enough, we'll make decisions beyond that to decide, okay, well, that's kind of my job to a certain extent, is to say, yes, we're going to commit time to a larger use case or problem, and that's what we need to drive forwards. And I think that plays back to what you were saying, Horace, which is large problems, medium problems, and small problems. And I know that people always ask for process around that stuff, but sometimes there just isn't. Like, sometimes it's just, we've got a bank of knowledge within our team that exists. Let's just try those things that we didn't try before. And I can't tell them all to do that. They'll just come up with those ideas themselves, the same as our lawyers are when they access this tech. They'll just try to do something that, even if you think about the promise of machine learning in the past, I think there was that, we can do everything. Oh no, it can't do everything. People were quite disappointed. I'm really quite excited that this sort of helps to undo some of that, like, naysayer, well, you said this to me once and it wasn't capable. Now they're sort of looking at it going, oh, hang on a minute, this can do that now. I think we're finding it more that they don't quite understand how much could be done. And we're constantly saying, well, what are you trying? What are you doing? What about if you did it this way? And they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. So back to the use case piece, revisit old problems, test existing use cases. Might be something we do well now that could be done better as well. So that's our approach anyway. Half an answer there somewhere.
May I just add to that a little bit? Actually, I think what's been interesting too, I mean, yes, certainly for Gen AI, but I also interest around generative AI applications is it's sort of like a rising tide, right? And so I think it has allowed some of the use cases that might be solved with other tools to really move forward as well, because the excitement has driven adoption, or at least interest, or maybe even tolerance in some cases for some of the tools that were already in existence and could have solved certain of these problems.
So, sorry, Elizabeth, I accidentally hit remove when I was trying to spotlight you, but I think I only lost a second of your time. Leslie makes a really interesting comment in the chat, which is combining the thoughts from Christian and Elizabeth. Imagine gathering all the firm-wide emails from the past number of years and then using Gen AI to classify them and determine what's wasteful, what's repetitive, what can be streamlined. Has anyone here tried to do a project as big as that? Or does anyone here have an appetite to do a project as big as that?
I'm not the guy. I'm not the law firm guys. But the thing about this for us is not a big project anymore. It used to be. Doing these sorts of things would be big projects. They're not anymore. These are 5 minutes. If you have the right tool set, you sit down and you wire things up. And to dovetail with Elliot was just saying, one of the process pieces, you should prototype and try to see if something works and do a simple version of something before you go full bore. You don't need to do that anymore. But it is really cool and interesting that you now have the ability to start to wire those things up. And like Elizabeth suggested earlier, we've done this with one of our customers. They were getting some bad suggestions for use cases. So we just wired them up a use case evaluator. That kind of meta use of the technology, it's really good at determining what is and is not a good use case. It's really good at assisting you. In the next gen of Lego we're releasing in like a month, we're using the models to give all sorts of user feedback and do the automated review for the compliance policies. And the models themselves are really good at these kind of meta-related tasks towards the underlying use cases. So Leslie, it's great. It's a great example. You can do primary review, or you can let the model help you with that. It's such an accelerator.
Okay, so we've been talking about all these kind of generals around discovering use cases and kind of like these themes of topics. Let's go through and maybe speak on specifics. What have been kind of our favorite use cases among us? So Elliot, now you're the first person on my window. So Elliot, I'm going to throw to you. Let's talk about a couple of specifics. What can you share with us?
I mean, outside of when I kind of went early with the witness statements and like asset finance side of things, I think, we're looking at the data processing agreements is another play into this. I mean, look, I know there are really traditional use cases we can talk to, but there's some really like what I'm calling like less traditional, more random efficiency that we're kind of finding as well. So, I think back, this sort of plays that kind of email piece where we've had someone in the firm who kind of took an email chain. They were looking for something really specific, and for a document that kind of came as part of that. So they kind of exported that and fed it into AGPT. And what probably would have taken like a junior associate like a few hours, and really was what the legal director was expecting them to take a few hours, took them about 15 minutes within our system to go and find that. That's not to say that we've built some amazing system to do it. It's just that we've given them something that they can go and try those things with. So I'm kind of calling that more a random efficiency one. One that I heard randomly from another associate the other day, which kind of falls into this area, is essentially they were looking at a contract. I think they were saying it was particularly complex, and they were kind of struggling to get their head around the structure of it and how does all this stuff kind of play into it, the different kind of terms within there, and let's say how in what order they would come through and how they should understand that. They were really struggling with it. So all he did was chuck it into our system, asked it to kind of help him kind of structure that out and I guess understand it a bit better. It was like a quick thing. I wouldn't even say that saved time, and I want to talk about what saving time means as part of this as well. But it didn't save him time, it just suddenly made that task easier for him. So that just changed the way that he would interact with the different systems that we have and make something possible that maybe he would have struggled with for a bit longer, or maybe even made a mistake with. It's something that he could look at get it to, again, explore and almost summarize some of that information. So we could then go back and look at that contract afresh and say, oh, now I understand this. I can actually look at how do I apply my knowledge as a lawyer to what the impacts are, rather than spending too much time actually trying to break it down too much. So I'm kind of calling those our random efficiency ones, because honestly, the stuff I said earlier around witness statements and the asset finance piece and data processing agreements, like once you've done that, you can apply that in multiple ways across the different practice areas. It's the same thing, different prompts, you know. So I don't know if I can dive much further into those, because to a certain extent it's that simple. Like it's talking about what do I want to extract from these documents? How do I do that? Do I do that at a single level? Do I do that at a bulk level? And what's the structure of that I want that to come back to me in? Like we can do more specifics, but I think the two I said earlier were quite specific, and actually you can build off them. And that's I won't change the subject, but just to say one thing, I think of what other people have been saying here, which is the way to get engagement as well is I need to get my lawyers to share those use cases. That's what we're really trying to put the effort into, is that we do practice area meetings and we say, can you share that? Can you share that, what you've been doing? Because once they do that, others start saying, oh, I didn't realize you could do that. Maybe I could apply that here. So the use cases individually, if you think about type of contract or document, doesn't really matter. It's like, oh, well, I could apply that to this one. So the more we do that and the more sessions we do internally, that really helps unlock it. So yeah, there's a couple of nuggets there of what I call the random efficiency ones.
We're going to distill those down in a little bit. But Tom in the chat also makes a really good point, which is if we're looking at use cases, one of the really important factors is to evaluate where you're going to get support from the leadership. And it's kind of the opposite of what you're saying, Elliot, or rather not the opposite, but the kind of like top down rather than bottom up approach of, yes, listen to your team and gather their use cases, but also where you're going to get the financial and economic support, where you're going to get the political capital to go and take those use cases. Something I want to ask about before throwing to Conan is we are kind of thinking about this as well. What are the structured use cases? What are the things that you can put an application in front of lawyers and then they can say, yep, I gain value from this, fantastic, versus the give them an interface, let them go and explore and then gather and find the things that make sense. Like, do we see a world where we start off with the random happenstance, go and explore, and then eventually find those use cases to go, right, now here is a GPT that would do X, and then you just keep reverting back to it. Does anyone have any kind of thoughts on where you think the sort of evolution of this is going to go?
Go on, Conan, you go first.
I like kind of the one where I know a lot of firms have done this, and we have it too. You can have a chatbot, right? That's just sort of blank slate. You can go in and I think there is value in that if it comes with training. But there's more risk there. I mean, for those of you who haven't gotten too far in your journey, your risk team, your GC, your data governance side, they're going to want to be, if you hand somebody Copilot, right? Some firms have launched it, right? Now it's like when Google launched. It's in the hands of the users. You can't really control it as much. And we have to get there. We have to get to a point where everybody knows how to use these tools, what data to put into it, what not to, along with, client restrictions. There is a matrix that you have to weave. The nice thing about the pointed solution is, one, I think you can in some of these, what I'll show today, you can significantly reduce, I hate to say completely eliminate hallucination, but you can really temper it down a lot, just because I haven't seen it in our bot yet because it's so narrow. And you're giving somebody a confined app. You know who the users are, you know what the data is, you know what the use case is. This is very comforting to your GC and risk team. So as you get started, I would highly suggest to go with these use cases and don't just spin up the AI chatbot. This is also me getting to see a lot of other firms who've done it ahead of ours, including my previous firm, that was very ahead of this. And we're, being a little bit more strategic because we've seen kind of how the market has unfolded. But again, at the end of the day, I don't think restricting these tools is the right approach. But giving those pointed solutions, I think, can give that comfort and bring those more risk-averse colleagues along with you on the journey.
From anyone? Because Connor, I want to throw to you in a few minutes to showcase one of your favorite use cases as well. But before we go there, does anyone have thoughts on this topic of like what do you put in front of people? What's going to kind of speak to the audience and get value from having GPT rolled out?
I mean, we have a lot of history on this, Horace, over the last year. I mean, like 14, 15 months ago, it was a very much an open question for me whether the pathway to success was, giving people general tools and trying to train them up so that they can make more flexible use of general tools and letting them do that way versus put, as you said a minute ago, those specific GPTs that are pre-configured in front of people. And even though I think there's a time bound here on the adoption arc, our experience has been in the last 12 months that the pathway to success, if you can take that prompt engineering burden off the end user, put it in the expert team's hands, let them do it and make those solutions simple, dummy proof, ready to go, ready to use. That's really, really helpful. I don't think, however, you want to lose the general kind of sandbox where people can play and find and try to do things. You need that signal. You need to be able to see what they're doing. When somebody has a breakthrough, everyone's having breakthroughs all day, every day. And if you're not seeing it and capturing it, that value is just evaporating. And we need to help take our users on a journey here. We need to see what they know and what they don't know. Here's just a little anecdote. We have some data now, like when people are trying to drive compliance policies, and we try to help them do that with compliance checkpoints and stuff. We have some data now that suggests that even where you have a robust training regime, you're still getting about like 15% non-compliance on that. And people are sending data where it's not supposed to go. You need to be able to see that. You can't say no. I agree 100% with what Conan just said. The riskiest thing you can do in this market from a data protection perspective is not give people good options, because they will go, it's too sexy and too pervasive and too much a part of the zeitgeist. They're going to go find it on their own. We got to channel people into an enterprise solution where we have control that helps shape that journey. And I think in the early days, having the specific point solutions that help them get a tangible benefit where, somebody on Elliot's team or Elizabeth's team has pre-configured it to be well engineered to achieve something is a great solution. And I think we all together, vendors and firms alike, should aspire over the next 18 months, 24 months to start breaking down that atomic landscape of point solutions and trying to put these into a more comprehensive tool set so people aren't changing context and switching when they want to do something. They can kind of have a more integrated experience. But I think those things are at different stages of the journey. Right now, we're in exploration education mode. We need to help people understand how these works, get hands-on experience with them, because nothing teaches the capabilities and what they're good for, what they're bad for than tinkering. You're not going to train it in a seminar or lunch and learn.
Yeah, and if I can, I echo loads of what you just said.
Yes.
I think that was part of our journey. Like we didn't lock things down. We worked with our kind of risk team very early on to put the right policies in place and to kind of give that understanding. That gave us more comfort. But being quite honest, the reason that we kind of did our own build of our own platform in that sense was that it gave us all of that kind of certainty of security and where things are going, and we covered all of that. So we knew it wasn't a risk for our clients. It meant that our lawyers could use it on actual kind of work as well, but obviously still checking it. So that's the other thing here, right? We've done all these policies, and yes, we've got all these systems in place, but still our thing right now is check the output. That's still, we'll talk about RAG models and accuracy and stuff later if we want to get into that. But right now it's pretty good, but make sure you're fully aware of what's coming out of it. Are you happy with it? And check where it's come from and how it synthesized that data or done that summary, right? So I think all those bits are really important. And I think if you can't build that yourself, I think Christian's right. Find something that kind of helps you give a secure area that they can be doing that in, and you can be more confident around the security and those aspects of where the data's going.
So we're going to loop around to talk about adoption at the end. But before we talk about adoption, Conan, I know you've got a show and tell for us. So
I overachieved, maybe.
Go to your screen.
As long as it works, right? Death by demo here.
Hey, if you've ever been a vendor, demos going awry is
I haven't in a very long
course.
time. So give me 1 second here. All right, let me share this. Okay, so what I like about this might also be the middle ground of what we're talking about, because I think, Elliot, you hit on it. It's actually less the technical security we're worried about at this point. It's, are the lawyers staying within their ethical boundaries, certifying the work product as it come back, trusting all the outputs. Talked about it earlier. The front end, the back end, it's lower risk if that's how you're implementing your Gen AI solutions. What this is it's something that you can use, and this will be dummy data. This is synthetic data that we conceived off of Looney Tunes characters, and it's basically a customer support bot. Think of it maybe like an Amazon where they're shopping at Acme and they have all sorts of questions. But this can be used for reviewing outside counsel guidelines. This can be used for filling out vendor questionnaires or client questionnaires, right? Where you're repeating the same questions over and over, and you want to have a consistent response, right? So that whoever is tasked with responding is getting what the firm has already approved and certified, not something that they think is close or similar. You can have so much confidence in the exact nature of this, and that is supported by the references you get. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump into this one. This is based off a Word document. You can do it. We've done it in Word and Excel. And I'm going to say we need to find a GPS to find Bugs Bunny, and it can work in the forest. And the bot is going to say right now, oh, there it goes. And it just flattened out on me. There's my death by demo right there. So
what I say, Conan, I always go, it's
back up. It's a connectivity issue we've been having. Geez, oh my gosh, it was working like 10 minutes ago. So I'm
it was working.
It's been working the whole morning.
Well, what? I was going to ask you a couple of technical questions on that while you were doing a demo, which is, how did you build that? Like, what tools did you use? To the extent you can disclose, what were the parts that went into it?
Yeah, so when we build the bot, it's this is a server issue. It's a connectivity to our OpenAI service that happens to tap out, and that's just some of the fun we have. But what we do is, some of these documents we're looking to take on are 200-300 pages, right? So you have to chunk out the document. Now, what we've thought about in the spreadsheet version of this is trying to go on a go-forward basis to not just think about this back-end processing of Gen AI, but can we actually stage the data better? If we're copying and pasting a bunch of text into Word, can we also do that into Excel? Maybe it takes a little more time, but now you have a much more structured data set. You can actually chunk it in a conceptual way that makes sense instead of just this linear way. But you need to break up the documents less and less, I guess, as the context windows get bigger, but it's still an issue for very large documents. You're going to have some sort of vector embedding, right? So the chunk is going to be converted, stored in that vector database. It's just so the machines can read these things better. And then it's really, as Christian said earlier, it's in the instructions, right? When you give someone sort of an open chatbot, they're the ones that need to come up with the prompt, right? And they need to tinker with it. And some of the issues I've seen is that lawyers can lose steam, especially got billable work sitting on the side, and they're trying to get these things right. So baking in these instructions to do that point solution is, I think, certainly invaluable, because you can just see it work right away with no extra work. You just ask the question, you get the response. What you would have seen is the response, and you would have seen the snippet from the source highlighted for that. And then, the user comes in, inputs the question, and we run to get the PDF image with the text highlighted. So we keep a copy of the document, and it indexes the PDF by text and page number. And after extracting the references from the response, it makes a text search within the page indice, and then and after the text search is done, the bot will highlight the text on a new copy of the PDF and return it to the user. So it'll tell you what page it's on, it'll give you the screenshot, and then you can actually download the highlighted PDF in full at this point. Hopefully we get it down to just being able to do that page. But I'm told it's up again, Horace. I know I've taken up some technicals, but should I just try to run it really quick here?
Go for it, please.
Oh my gosh. Never again. Never again am I trying to go above and beyond. This is...
Next time I give you a demo, Conan, and it doesn't work, you can just be like, I feel you. I understand.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but usually maybe you just have like one client on the call, and who knows how many people are watching me fail. So this is good, right? We want to find the GPS. No one's asked this question yet before. So what the bot is instructed to do is say, don't infer anything, don't make anything up, just tell it, is it in the data set? If not, then let us know that. And that's great. And eventually we'll have it draft us and some other in our actual sort of like in the legal context where you might have a playbook that you're spinning off of. We'll actually want it to take an attempt at drafting the answer, but you're going to know that it's a newly drafted answer. It's not something that's coming from your data set to get you started. Okay, but now we're going to try to ask, we have the Acme rocket and it won't start. Can you help me figure out why it's not taking off? And right here, you can see that question's in the database. This might be a little small. Let me try to get that up. So we're sorry to hear that. Let's troubleshoot. And please check if the fuel compartment is properly sealed again. And is that the answer that we're given? And, that's the answer here. That's the exact wording. And then we actually tell it to just kind of give a generic answer as well. And then here you can download the PDF and you can see references on page 6. I have an Excel version of that. All that really does, maybe let's just run it really quick. What that does, it actually gives you a link to the cell in your spreadsheet. So again, this would tell you if it didn't have the answer, but this one should have the answer. And
So Connor, what sort of content are you running that on?
just like Word on, like it's, well, the users are putting in Word documents in Excel. Right now, we have to then take that, we extract the text, and then we do our own engineering work off of it. But we can, Excel's a little bit easier to engineer because you just need the sort of the cell coordinates. And so while it's actually not querying this Excel at this point, we're taking this extracted text and we're still running it back into where the answer is. So you would see here, this is the answer to the question. It puts us right there. And right here. So
Very cool. How long did it take for you guys to build that?
Well, again, I think it's like we've been talking about before, the tooling is actually really important. Getting the right teams, getting the skills together on your team. Once you have that in place, this is actually pretty easy. It was actually really surprising. And now we have the template. So now someone has another sort of data set, confined data set. We're not crawling across company documents and firm documents and things. It's very just static, but in that a little bit safer. And we, sorry, what was the question? What was the question on that first?
How long did it take you to build that? Which
Not you can, like after that, to perfect and stuff, you're gonna kind of like tweak it as you go. But yeah, like you can spin this up in like a day.
So okay, we're coming up to time. So 2 lightning rounds. First set of questions that I would like everybody to answer is, how do you get people interested to actually drive adoption? Because as we were saying earlier, you can give them a general tool, you can give them a chatbot, you can give them a specific tool. You can go top down, you can go bottom up. What have you guys seen in terms of successful adoption? Elizabeth, I'll throw to you first.
Sure. So I think for us, we spend a lot of time thinking about who the end user is, who we're going to present to or train to use a Gen AI application. And we do this because even though there's excitement around Gen AI tools, if it doesn't sort of perform exactly, or it's a use case that has like nothing to do with their practice or what they do every day, it's just going to fall flat. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that. So for example, if we're going to be training a partner and they have written a client alert on a particular subject or case, maybe we'll present that use case or sort of run that same thing. Okay, if you use this using a Gen AI application, here's what you would get, compare it to what they did. That's sort of an easy one for people to relate to. Or if it's a group of associates, showing how efficiently a Gen AI tool can extract or organize information, giving them something to review and revise instead of starting with that blank page, that seems to resonate a lot too. So we really focus on who are we talking to, who is the audience, and what is going to be most meaningful to them to get them interested, wanting to do more. Then they'll go on to that next use case, try something else out.
Amazing. Elliot, over to you. How have you, well, let me rephrase. How have you gotten people interested to drive adoption?
Well, I think there's two parts to this. One is I just think the market did this. Like, people just got interested because it was happening. There was really interesting stuff outside of legal that was going on. And then our clients started asking our fee earners questions. That's a good way to get your kind of lawyers come talk to you about this stuff, as your clients are asking. So that was really good. We kind of did some of what Elizabeth said there as well, which is it's constant engagement as far as I'm concerned. You have to keep engaging. You have to make sure that the buy-in at the right level of the firm. Like, we had our managing partner talking about generative AI in our platform in a firm-wide update to the whole firm. That's really good. That helps people engage. And then we've done other things, like Kerry and I attended every away day for our groups. So we went up to Edinburgh every week for a month to kind of talk. And what we did was just take some of what you said there, Elizabeth, which is like structured ideas. So I think, we had use cases and we were running GIFs on essentially like the board behind us in terms of a PowerPoint presentation. Like, look how this works. Look at this type of document. We've applied this to another type of document that you use in your kind of practice area. Look, and that kind of started to open their eyes a bit. And then we did the opposite of that, and then just got them to do really fun stuff on their phones that we'd enabled our platform on, and said, just, create a poem about the away day, just write anything that's creative, just to get them to understand like how powerful this thing is. I think that was half of it, was just getting them to understand, oh my God, it can do that. Like, and that's just like some random request. And we're like, yeah, just think about how, if it can review a document for you and you can ask it questions and you can ask it to summarize in a specific way, look what it can do. And so we've mixed a bit of the, best ways to kind of prompt the system into those presentations. And then we've done other stuff like prompt like pro sessions that, most of the firm have joined and kind of been through. So it's all engagement. It's AI fundamentals. We did that as a session. We did webinars for our clients. I think that's me saying lots of things, but that's how hard it is to get that level of engagement and people interested. You kind of have to keep it fresh and keep them hearing about it. And that's the way to kind of keep them interested and coming to us with use cases and using it, essentially.
Thank you. A lot to take away from there. And I'm sure that AI has made a summary. Conan, what about you? How have you driven adoption?
I don't have too much to add. And I think, we're still trying to figure out our wider adoption strategy on it. Right now, we're just kind of going point to point. So I can't really add too much else, but, trying to keep it fresh, like Elliot said, without, having AI in their ear all the time, without showing them the benefits that you're coming up with. So that has to be part and parcel. Like, I don't think you can continue on that sort of comm strategy without new wins every time you're refreshing. Otherwise, it's just going to seem like noise.
Thank you. Christian, how would you drive adoption?
Great insights. I think a lot of this is actually very similar to products generally. It's not about generative AI, but in this context, again, just to focus on the delta, just what is different, the small slice that might be different. And Elliot alluded to it. This is cool stuff. I mean, it's really, if anyone else remembers the first time you generated a sonnet on your computer for your mom in the kitchen or something, and it blew your mind. This is really fun, cool stuff. The one insight I would offer is the following, and we think this, at vendors, we think about this vis-a-vis our customers, but inside of firms, you think about this for your users. You're going to have some users that are really visionary and early adopters and get excited about this stuff. And you're going to have some that are kind of like late majority laggards, and they don't, they're going to have to be dragged kicking and screaming, right? You don't have to serve all those people at the same time right away with the same initiatives. We're at the early stages right now. So try to leverage that excitement for the people who are genuinely feeling that tailwind, and just try to help make sure they don't fall off the path too early. Because it's, you need a little expertise, right? So just put in place the tools, the monitoring, the examples, the competitions, the webinars, the lunch and learns, whatever you need to help those self-selecting early adopters get far enough down the path that the hook gets set and they can really start to make progress. Make sure you're supporting that journey in a dynamic way, in the way that Conan was just suggesting. And then at the same time, you need a dual-pronged strategy to make sure that you're finding those high-value, tangible use cases that will really drive some value for somebody, even if it's small, and make it user-proof, just easy to do for the people who need a little bit more help and are a little bit too busy and aren't super jazzed about it. And if you can kind of do those two things at the same time, historically, you could do that sequentially. I don't think we have the time for that. I think everything's moving way too fast. I think we need to cater to both communities right out of the gate. But if you can tend to those people and not worry about making sure that each initiative has 100% coverage, because it shouldn't, I think it's a good way to get started.
Amazing. So final lightning round, and then we're going to wrap it up. And it's going to need a one-sentence answer from everyone, which is, what is, in your biased view, the most valuable use case that you are focused on right now? And if you say, hey, I can't share because it's a confidential thing, that's okay too. So Elizabeth, starting with you, the most valuable use case you're focused on.
This is the danger of going first. Pass.
Pass. Elliot.
This is a hard one to share because this is where, if any of you have seen Kerry's post I think she put it out today. So we are doing specific stuff around bulk review, RAG model. There is some very specific areas we think we can work on that for, and to deliver quite specific services in the market that we would never have been able to do before. So it's built around those sorts of things, but it's hard to kind of share very specific. But that's the thing that I would say is really interesting, and that's the interesting about how you do things yourself versus off-the-shelf stuff as well.
Conan.
It's very early days, and I don't even actually know the specifics yet, but we were actually in deep talks with a client to build a prototype for them to potentially maybe go to market with. I don't know. It's early days, but it could be extraordinary. We're meeting tomorrow to really dig in to our proposed use case. So I think, if you get the opportunity, and you should try to make those opportunities with clients. I mean, we talked about Tom Baldwin's posting about firm leadership getting in. There's nothing that's going to move the needle more than satisfying a client, getting more work for them, collaborating with them, probably buying what they're selling after you build it too. So be prepared for that. There's nothing better than that. So try to put yourself in those positions.
Amazing. And Christian, let's have you wrap us up.
I'm going to cheat and give you two quick ones, because one's going to be kind of oblique because I can't really talk too much about it. But thinking about this audience, like the best, largest law firms in the world, when they go to try to find stuff, you're not looking for the generic attributes. You're not looking for the general filters. You're not looking for any of that. We all have tooling for that. What you really are trying to find, and why your clients are showing up and paying you $1,500 an hour, is because there's some weird idiosyncrasy somewhere. And having the ability to converse in natural language to find the weird thing about something that happened in the past on a semantic basis, that's really valuable, because that's one of the hardest things you do in a firm, is find those little nuggets of a deal that had this weird attribute, maybe in a completely different context. That's what you got to do. So love that. And there's some really interesting RAG-enabled approaches to actually do that with these tools. But the other part of the answer, Horace, just the silliest thing I think I talked about in the very first demo we ever did. Every lawyer at a top law firm, their number one business development thing they do is like send their clients news updates of things that might be relevant to them to stay front of mind. And I've never met one lawyer who did enough of it. They always are like, I wish I could do more. I wish I could do more. And they don't, because you can't just forward an article to a client. You got to surface a couple of interesting points that are relevant to them to put in the cover email. These technologies are tailor-made for this. They're amazing. We can literally get 10x our BD touches in the trenches at law firms using the simplest chatbot in the world. So that's where I'll leave it.
Incredible. Guys, you have been just the most phenomenal panelists, and you've shared so many insights with the audience today. I'm sure everyone's going to reach out to you afterwards and say, can I please get a list of all your use cases? Feel free to share with me first, and then I'll pass them and funnel them for you. But no, this has been amazing. And thank you everyone for participating, and thank you everyone for coming and listening. And for those of you watching later, and I'll speak for everybody, please feel free to ping us a message, and at least for myself, very happy to share whatever I know. And thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing everyone again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.